I never expected the night to feel different, but it did. There was something quiet in the air, like the kind of silence that shows up before a storm. My kids were already in bed, my wife was scrolling through her phone in the bedroom, and I was alone at the kitchen table in our small Salt Lake City home. The dishwasher hummed softly. A streetlight outside cast a warm glow across the blinds. Everything felt normal, safe, predictable. The kind of predictable that used to keep me anchored when my testimony first started to slip away. I opened my laptop just to check a few emails before joining my wife. Nothing unusual. But then I saw it. An unread message with a name that felt like a punch to the chest. From Harris Elder, Mission Companion. Subject: You deserve to know the truth. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I hadn't talked to Harris in years. Not since he became a seminary teacher, and I quietly distanced myself after leaving the church. He had been everything I wasn't on the mission: disciplined, obedient, reverent, a rule-following machine who made me feel like my doubts were moral failures instead of thoughts. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I felt this strange tension inside me, like time had paused, waiting for me to choose which direction my life would tilt. I told myself not to open it. I told myself I didn't care anymore. But some part of me, the part that still prayed under my breath out of habit, the part that still hesitated to say certain words out loud, was curious. So I clicked. The email was short, almost painfully simple. Brother, I know you stepped away from the church, and I know you've been searching. I found something during my research, something important. You need to see this. Please read it when you're alone. There was a single folder attached. It was named documentation.zip. No explanation. No summary. No warning. I felt my chest tighten. A small drop of sweat rolled down my side even though the house was cool. My eyes stayed locked on the screen, and for the first time in a long time I realized I was afraid. Not afraid of the church. Not afraid of sin or punishment or anything I used to obsess over. It was deeper, almost physical. It was the fear of breaking something inside me that I still hadn't admitted was holding on. I moved the cursor toward the file and hesitated. My wife called faintly from the bedroom asking if I was coming soon. I answered with a light tone, pretending everything was normal, pretending I wasn't standing on the edge of something I couldn't describe. She didn't hear the tremor in my voice, or maybe she did and ignored it, something we were both getting good at. Before I could talk myself out of it, I double-clicked the file. My screen flickered as a progress bar appeared. Extracting 58 files. The bar crawled forward painfully slow, and with each percent that passed, I felt tension coil deeper inside my stomach. I wondered if this was a mistake. I wondered if there was a reason I never dug deeper when I first left the church. I had always told people, I'm just stepping back to breathe. But the truth was more complicated. I didn't want to lose everything. My family, my marriage, my parents' respect, the culture that raised me. Leaving the church had been like taking off a heavy backpack, but realizing the straps were sewn into my skin. The folder opened. Inside were scanned letters, dated journals, typed transcripts, academic notes, timelines with cross-references I didn't recognize, and files labeled with dry names that didn't prepare me for how violently they would shake me. Before I clicked anything, memories came rushing back, as if my mind needed to rewind my story before letting me rewrite it. I was back in Washington State, 19 years old, riding my bike through freezing rain with Elder Harris leading ahead of me. He used to chant under his breath while we rode, rehearsing scriptures, perfecting lessons, disciplining his thoughts the way he disciplined his body. I admired him, feared him, wanted to be like him, wanted to be good like him. The mission president used to talk about obedience like it was a spiritual currency. Exact obedience brings miracles, he'd say, and Harris lived that principle like it was the air he breathed. I remembered how I once confessed to him after having a disturbing question about Joseph Smith. He stared at me like I'd committed a crime. "Doubts are temptations," he said. "You don't entertain them. You reject them." It had worked on me back then. I hated the idea of being spiritually weak. I worked harder, woke up earlier, fasted more. But every time something didn't make sense, the same quiet feeling returned, that something wasn't aligning inside me. Something wasn't fitting, no matter how hard I pushed myself to believe harder. And now here I was, years later, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a folder full of files that might confirm everything I had been afraid to think. I clicked the first document. It was a scanned journal entry dated 1842. Handwritten, elegant pen strokes, fading ink, annotations from a historian I didn't know. At first the language seemed normal, meetings, sermons, daily notes. But then a phrase appeared that made the hair on my arms rise. It suggested something I had never heard in church lessons, something I didn't learn in seminary, something that contradicted what I had taught on my mission, something that didn't match the correlated version of history I had sworn to defend. I blinked, reread it, tried to rationalize it, but a cold weight settled into my stomach. Before I could make sense of it, my son walked into the kitchen rubbing his eyes. "Dad, I can't sleep." The document on my screen looked like it was glowing. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I snapped the laptop shut so fast he flinched. I walked him back to his room, tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and stayed at the door until he fell asleep. Everything looked so peaceful, innocent, untouched, the way my life used to feel before doubt had a name. When I returned to the kitchen, I reopened the laptop slowly, like it might explode. The journal entry stared back at me. My throat tightened. I clicked the next file, and then the next, and then the next. The deeper I went, the more something inside me began to shift. A part of me wanted to shut the whole thing down and forget I ever saw it. But another part, the part I'd spent years suppressing, leaned in, hungry, desperate, ready to know. I heard a soft rustling from the hallway. My wife stepped into the kitchen, her hair tied up, eyes tired. "You're still up?" she asked. "Yeah, just reading something." She walked closer, and for a moment I panicked she might see the screen. She didn't. Instead, she kissed my cheek lightly and whispered, "Come to bed soon, okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I will." But she paused, studied me. "You look pale. Everything okay?" I swallowed hard. My voice felt stuck somewhere deep. "Yeah. Just tired." She didn't believe me. I could feel it. But she didn't push. She turned and walked back toward the bedroom, and I listened to the sound of her footsteps fading away. I sat back down and opened another document. A timeline, names, dates, relationships, statements that contradicted everything I had been taught about church history. My pulse hammered in my ears. And then I clicked something I didn't recognize. A file with a plain name, unimportant at first glance. But the moment it opened, the world around me seemed to stop. One sentence, one line, one detail that connected to everything else. I froze. My vision blurred. The rhythmic hum of the dishwasher vanished. The air in the room felt thinner, colder, sharper. I whispered, barely breathing, "No, no, no. This can't." But something inside me already knew. Everything was about to collapse. I stayed there, frozen, staring at that single line on the page. It felt like a small crack forming in a thick sheet of glass, quiet at first, almost imperceptible, but carrying enough pressure to eventually shatter everything beneath it. My throat felt tight, my palms were sweating, and every beat of my heart sounded too loud. The dishwasher's hum finally returned to my awareness, but it felt distant, like it belonged to a house down the street. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them the words would rearrange themselves, that maybe I had misread something, that maybe my mind was exaggerating a detail out of exhaustion. But when I looked again, the sentence was still there, cold and precise and impossible to untangle from its implications. It wasn't anti-church material. It wasn't some angry blog or bitter apostate rant. It was a primary source, a handwritten record, a piece of history I had never been shown, never been allowed to consider, a part of the story that changed everything. I whispered, "Why didn't they tell us this?" My voice cracked. I felt something inside me twist. I had spent years defending the church, building my identity around it, shaping every major decision in my life according to what I thought was eternal truth. And now, one line, one fact, was unraveling years of certainty like it was nothing more than a loose thread waiting to be pulled. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My legs were unsteady, my breathing uneven. I started pacing around the kitchen, running my hands through my hair, muttering pieces of phrases I couldn't finish. It felt like the floor was tilting, like gravity had shifted just a few degrees off center and my whole body didn't know how to adjust. The digital clock on the microwave blinked 11:43 p.m. My house was silent except for my footsteps tapping the hardwood floor. I walked to the sink, turned on the cold water and splashed some on my face, hoping it would ground me. But instead, when I looked at my reflection in the window above the sink, I barely recognized myself. My eyes looked hollow. My jaw was tense. Something that had been dormant inside me, something I'd tried to bury, was awake again. I whispered, "Why did you send this to me, Harris?" A part of me was angry at him, another part was grateful, and another part, terrified, because the evidence wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't something I could shrug away. It was the kind of thing that once seen could never be unseen, the kind of truth that reshapes everything else around it. I turned off the sink and dried my face with the dish towel. I returned to the table and sat down again, feeling a heavy weight settle on my shoulders. My eyes moved across the page, rereading the lines around the sentence, trying to find context that would soften the blow. Instead, every line I read made the impact harder. I reached for my laptop and scrolled through the rest of the document. More journal entries, more letters, more timelines, each one reinforcing the same devastating fact. My mind raced back to my mission, to my temple wedding, to the countless testimonies I had borne from pulpits. I remembered promising investigators that God would confirm the truth if they prayed. I remembered feeling the Spirit, or at least what I thought was the Spirit, when I declared Joseph Smith a prophet. How was I supposed to make sense of all that now? Something inside me collapsed, not violently but slowly, like a building that had been hollowed out for years finally sinking under its own weight. I shut the laptop. I couldn't read anymore. Not then. Not without feeling like my chest was caving in. I walked toward the bedroom, each step heavier than the last. When I opened the door, the room was still dimly lit by my wife's bedside lamp. She was lying on her side, scrolling through Pinterest, saving ideas for home renovations we might never actually do. Her eyes lifted to me when I entered. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that I was just tired, that work had drained me. But my face must have given me away. I sat at the edge of the bed, rubbed my hands together, and tried to find the right words. I read something," I said quietly. Her body stiffened. I saw it instantly. That small tightening of the shoulders, the micro-expression of fear, the one that only spouses recognize. "Something church-related?" she asked, hesitating. I swallowed. "Yeah." She sat up straight, her face already pale. "Are you looking at anti-Mormon stuff again?" "No," I said quickly. "It's not that. It's primary sources, actual documents, journal entries." Her mouth pressed into a tight line. She shook her head. "You promised me you wouldn't go down that path again. You said you were done questioning." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wasn't looking for anything. Harris emailed me. He sent me something he found doing research." She blinked in confusion. Harris? Your mission companion? He's still active. Probably even more active than before. Why would he send you something like that? Because... My voice trembled. Because it's real. And he knows it's real. She looked at me with this expression I had never seen from her before, a mixture of fear, heartbreak, and anger. I can't do this, she whispered. Not again. Not this. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away slightly. What did you read? She asked. I shook my head. I can't explain it right now. I don't even know how to explain it. Something's wrong. Something we were taught isn't true. She covered her mouth with her hand. Stop. Please stop. I don't want to hear it. Her reaction hit me harder than the evidence itself. It was like watching someone you love step away from you on a cliff's edge, afraid of following you into the unknown. I wanted to respect her fear, but I also needed her. I needed someone to hold on to while everything inside me was unraveling. I'm not trying to tear anything down, I said softly. I'm trying to understand. But understanding leads to doubt, and doubt leads to apostasy, she said, tears forming in her eyes. And apostasy leads to losing everything. That's not true, I whispered. It is, she cried. Maybe not for everyone, but for us, for our family. I can't lose our foundation. I can't raise our kids without it. I felt something inside me fracture. Not completely break, but fracture. Like two realities pulling in opposite directions, and I was caught between them. I'm still me, I said. I'm still the man you married. But you're not, she whispered. Not if you keep going down this road. We sat in silence for almost a minute. A long, painful minute filled with all the words we didn't want to say. Finally, she lay down, turning her back to me. I'm tired, she whispered. Please, just come to bed. I wanted to. I really did. But the weight in my chest wouldn't let me rest. I'll be there soon, I said. I walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. My hands were trembling again. I leaned against the hallway wall and closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing. Everything felt upside down. My wife's fear, the evidence, my past, my faith, my identity. Nothing was stable anymore. I grabbed my phone and typed a message to Harris. Can we talk? Now? Please. Within seconds, the typing bubble appeared. Call me. I'm awake. I walked back into the kitchen, sat down at the table and stared at the laptop, still closed, still hiding the words that wouldn't leave my mind. Then I hit the call button. Hey, he answered, his voice low, tired, almost broken. I figured you'd be calling. I exhaled shakily, ready to ask him why he sent it, why he thought I was ready, why he thought I needed to see something that could tear my world apart. But before I could speak, he said something that made everything inside me go still. I'm sorry, man, I really am, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, steady but heavy, like he'd rehearsed this conversation in his mind long before I ever reached out. I swallowed hard, trying to force words out, but everything inside me felt tangled. He finally spoke again, his voice low and cautious. I know exactly what you're feeling right now, he said. I went through the same thing, the same documents, the same collapse. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Why did you send them to me, Harris? Why now? Because, he said, exhaling sharply, you and I were the same kind of missionary. We believed hard. We served hard. We shoved everything uncomfortable deep into a box and locked it away. And guys like us, when that box finally opens, it hurts more than it should. I stared at the dim glow of the kitchen light, trying to hold myself together. It feels like something is breaking, I whispered. That's because it is, he said. And it has to. None of us can live with contradictions forever. I gripped the phone tighter. What did you find first? What was the thing that broke you? There was a long pause, long enough that I started wondering if the call had dropped. Then he spoke, his voice cracked, like he was reliving the moment. For me, he said, it was Joseph's timeline. The dates, the relationships, the things we weren't told. I was researching for a paper, just like any faithful historian would. I wasn't trying to prove anything wrong, and then one night I found that journal entry, the one I put in the folder, and it was like my chest split open. Yeah, I whispered. I know the line. You saw it, didn't you? Yes. Silence again. Not nervous silence, not uncomfortable silence, just two people sitting miles apart, trying to breathe through something they couldn't name. You're not crazy, he finally said. You're not broken. You're not being deceived. You're seeing facts that were hidden from us, that's all. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. But what do I do now? My wife is terrified. My family will lose their minds. I already walked away once, and now it feels like stepping away again but deeper. That's because this isn't just about belief anymore, he said. It's about identity, culture, family systems, everything we were taught to be. Our entire sense of self was tied to the church. When the historical foundation collapses, the emotional foundation breaks with it. His words hit me like a slow-moving wave, heavy and inevitable. I rubbed my forehead, trying to calm the racing thoughts. I don't know how to tell my wife, I said. I don't even know how to talk to myself right now. You don't need to tell her everything tonight, Harris said, but you need to talk to someone safe, someone who understands. That's you? Yeah, he said quietly. For now, yeah. I heard a faint tremor in his breath, like he wasn't just supporting me, he was still supporting himself. Like he was still somewhere inside his own collapse, still holding pieces together with bare hands. I felt sick when I read it, I said. Literally sick. Me too, he said. I threw up that night, I'm not kidding. My wife found me in the bathroom shaking. What did she say? Nothing helpful, he admitted with a hollow laugh. She told me I needed to pray about it, that Satan was attacking my intellect. Then she called her dad, who told her to take our kids to her mom's for a few days so I could get the devil out. My eyes widened. Are you serious? Dead serious, he said. That was the beginning of the end for our marriage. A chill crawled up my spine. I stiffened. I don't want that to happen to us. It might not, he said. Your wife is different. She's softer, more patient. She sees you, not just the priesthood role you're supposed to fill, but you need to understand something. What? When you question the church, you're not just questioning doctrine, you're threatening the entire structure your family leans on, and people react to that like it's an earthquake. His voice dropped to a whisper. But earthquakes are natural, and sometimes they're necessary. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was spinning too fast, circling around memories of my wife crying when I first stopped attending church. The look in her eyes when she said she didn't want to raise our kids without a spiritual leader. The fear in her voice earlier tonight. The way she turned away from me, not out of anger, but out of panic. Harris, I finally whispered. What if this destroys us? It won't, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. But it will change you, and it will force honesty between you. Real honesty, and that's not a bad thing. I pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to think, but everything felt foggy. How long did it take you, I asked, to stop feeling like you were losing your mind? A while, he said. Months, maybe a year. I went through anger, grief, denial, everything. But one day it hit me. The collapse wasn't punishment. It was clarity. Something about that sentence sank deep into me, like an echo of something I'd felt but couldn't articulate. Clarity, I whispered. Yeah, he said. And clarity hurts before it heals. We talked for another 20 minutes. We didn't discuss doctrine or specifics, just the emotional fallout, the practical fears, the loneliness of faith transitions. He told me I wasn't alone. He told me there was life after collapse. He told me the panic would soften eventually, and that I needed to be gentle with myself. Gentle, a word I had never applied to myself before. After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet kitchen for a long time. The house felt different now, like it belonged to someone else. The walls felt closer, the air heavier, the lights too bright. I opened the laptop again, even though I knew I shouldn't, even though my chest already hurt. I clicked through more documents, more dates, more contradictions, more names, more evidence. The deeper I went, the more a strange sensation spread through me. Not just pain, not just grief, but a kind of internal knowing. A recognition that the truth had been running parallel to me my whole life, waiting for the moment I was finally still enough to see it. I closed the laptop after an hour, feeling completely drained. I walked to the bedroom again. My wife was asleep, curled under the blanket, breathing softly. She looked peaceful, untouched by anything that had happened in the last few hours. I wanted to hold her, to feel anchored, but I was afraid my touch would wake her into the same chaos I was drowning in. So I sat in the dark on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the impossible question spinning in my mind. How do you rebuild your identity when the foundation you built it on was never what you thought? And as that question echoed through me, something quiet and rhythmic emerged beneath it, a sense that everything moves in cycles. Certainty to doubt, doubt to clarity, clarity to transformation. Nothing stays still. Nothing remains unchanged. It was terrifying, but it also felt inevitable. The next morning, it felt like the world had shifted in ways no one else could see. The sunlight through the blinds looked normal. My kids eating cereal at the kitchen table looked normal. My wife packing lunches and reminding them to grab jackets looked normal. Everything was normal except me. Inside, it felt like a storm had moved through my chest and was still swirling quietly under the surface, rearranging everything in its path. I sat at the table pretending to scroll through my phone, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. My wife glanced at me a few times, her eyes cautious, as if she was checking whether the man from last night had disappeared and the version she knew had returned. I gave her small smiles, tried to signal stability, but I could tell she sensed something was off. After dropping the kids at school, I pulled into a quiet parking lot near a park. I killed the engine, leaned back in the seat, and closed my eyes. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of me and left only the outline. I whispered into the silence. What now? The truth was, I didn't know. I must have sat there for nearly an hour. Cars passed, people walked dogs. The world kept moving as if nothing had happened, while I felt like my entire internal landscape had been redrawn. Eventually I drove home, stepped into the house and sat down at my desk, staring at my laptop like it was a doorway to a version of my life I couldn't return to. But instead of opening more documents, I opened a blank page. Not to write, but to breathe. The house was quiet. My wife was running errands. I finally allowed the weight in my chest to spill out in the only direction that felt safe, onto the page. I wrote everything I felt: confusion, anger, betrayal, grief, fear, even a strange sense of relief that I hated myself for feeling. I typed and typed until my eyes burned. When I stopped, I looked at the words on the screen and realized something quietly devastating. This wasn't the beginning of my collapse. It was the moment I finally admitted the collapse had been happening for years. That night, my wife sat across from me at the dinner table after the kids went to bed. She folded her arms, her eyes worried and exhausted. "Are we okay?" she asked. Her voice trembled in a way that made my stomach twist. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "I don't know exactly where I'm going with all this," I said softly. but I'm not going anywhere away from you." She looked down, tears pooling in her eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Me too." We talked for hours, carefully, slowly, trying not to break each other further. I told her what I could, enough to be honest, but not enough to drop the entire weight of the evidence onto her shoulders. She told me she didn't understand, but she wanted to. She told me she loved me, and she told me she hated how fragile faith made her feel. When we finally went to bed, we lay facing each other in the dark. Our hands stayed intertwined even when sleep pulled at us. It wasn't resolution, but it was connection, and connection was enough for one night. Over the next few weeks, I took things one day at a time. I didn't read everything at once. I didn't push my wife. I didn't try to force answers into questions that were still raw. Instead, I started therapy, something I had avoided for years because I once believed the gospel was the only therapy anyone needed. I learned to sit with discomfort instead of fighting it. I let myself feel grief instead of labeling it as weakness. I spent a lot of time outside, walking trails, breathing in cold winter air, watching families at parks, noticing things I had never really seen before. I realized how much of my life had been lived through a filter of what I was supposed to feel rather than what I actually felt. My relationship with my parents grew tense. My mom bore her testimony at me 3 times over Sunday dinner. My dad sent me long texts filled with quotes from church leaders. My siblings avoided the topic entirely. I understood. Faith wasn't just belief to them, it was identity, purpose, community, a safety net woven into every part of their lives. Challenging it felt like challenging them. I learned to approach it gently, not out of submission but out of empathy. Months passed before I could look at the folder again without feeling like my chest would explode. But when I finally did, something had shifted. The panic was gone. The fear had softened. The ground beneath me still felt unfamiliar, but it was no longer breaking. I read slowly this time, carefully, without guilt. Without the old instinct to fix contradictions or rationalize discomfort. Instead, I let the truth be the truth, not a threat, not an enemy, not a crisis, just reality. And reality, I realized, doesn't bend to belief. It doesn't shrink or rearrange itself to keep us comfortable. It simply is. One evening I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the Wasatch Mountains, the sky streaked in soft pink and orange. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness. A kind of inner alignment, not because everything made sense, but because I was finally being honest with myself. It struck me then, quietly, like a whisper of understanding. Things don't collapse all at once. They weaken slowly over time, tiny cracks forming beneath the surface long before anything becomes visible. And when the moment of collapse finally comes, the moment you see the evidence, the moment the truth arrives, it feels instant, but it isn't. It's the final step in a long chain of causes you were too afraid to examine. I breathed in the cool evening air and felt something settle inside me. Not closure, not conviction, something more gentle. Acceptance. I wasn't the same person I had been months earlier. My faith was gone. My identity had changed. My marriage was evolving. But there was a strange kind of peace in all of it. A rhythm I didn't know existed until I stopped trying to force life into one narrow path. I picked up my phone and recorded a short message. Not for anyone in particular, but maybe for people like me someday. "If you're watching this," I said quietly, "and you've been through something similar, you're not alone. You're not broken, and you're not losing your mind. You're waking up. It hurts, but it leads somewhere softer." I hesitated, then added, "If you want to support stories like this, there's a link in the description." I ended the recording and put the phone down. The night settled around me, soft and familiar. The air carried the faint scent of pine and distant barbecue. Kids were playing down the street. A dog barked. Life continued in small, beautiful ways. My testimony hadn't collapsed instantly. It had dissolved quietly, layer by layer, until the truth finally had room to be seen. And in that space, after the collapse, after the storm, I found something new forming. Not faith, not certainty, just honesty. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.